want to start with something a man told me at a gas station 3 years ago. He was maybe 65. Button-down shirt, good posture, he looked healthy. We were both waiting for the pump, and somehow we got to talking, the way strangers do when there's nothing else to do. He said, "I retired 8 months ago. Best decision I ever made." Then he paused, and something shifted in his face. I just wish someone had told me what to stop doing. Not what to start, what to stop. Because I kept doing the same things I'd always done, and they started eating me alive. I didn't ask him what he meant. I wish I had, because I found out for myself 2 years later, sitting in my own kitchen, 63 years old, tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix, wondering why a life I'd worked 40 years to build felt like it was quietly caving in. Nobody handed me a list, so I built one. My name is Alan Marsh. I'm 67 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee. And today I'm going to share the 7 things I had to stop doing before my 60s broke me, and the things I've watched quietly break other men just like me. Some of these will be uncomfortable to hear. Good. They were uncomfortable to learn. Before we go any further, please hit that like button and subscribe. This channel tells honest stories for men over 60, not what the wellness industry wants to sell you, not what your doctor has 4 minutes to explain. The real things, the things men talk about when nobody's watching. Now, I want to say something up front. This is not a list of health tips. It's not about cutting out red meat or taking the right vitamins. There are plenty of videos for that. This is about habits, patterns. The invisible things men over 60 do every single day that silently drain their energy, shrink their world, damage their health, and cost them years they could have spent differently. Here's what makes this harder than any diet or exercise plan. Most of these things feel normal, comfortable even. You've been doing them so long you don't notice them anymore. That's exactly what makes them dangerous. And I'll tell you right now, number 1 on this list is the one nobody wants to admit to. The one that when I finally recognized it in myself, I had to sit with for a long time before I could even say it out loud. Let's start with number 7 and work our way down. Number 7, stop waiting until something hurts to pay attention to your body. Neil Garber is 64 and lives in Columbus, Ohio. For most of his adult life, Neil was the kind of man who didn't go to the doctor unless something was actively on fire. A cold? Walk it off. A sore back? Stretch it out. Chest tightness after climbing stairs? Probably just the weather. His wife asked him to get a checkup every year for a decade. He made the appointment 6 times, went twice. At 62, during a routine visit he finally kept, his doctor found something. Not dramatic, not a death sentence. A blood pressure reading that had almost certainly been climbing for 4 or 5 years unnoticed, and cholesterol numbers that told a story about a decade of slow accumulation. His doctor said to him, "Neil, your body has been sending letters for years. You just haven't been opening them." That phrase stayed with him. The problem for men over 60 isn't that the body breaks down suddenly, it's that it sends warnings quietly, over a long time, and most men are trained from boyhood to push through, stay silent, not make a fuss about discomfort. Research published in the American Journal of Men's Health found that men are 25% less likely than women to have visited a doctor in the past year, and the gap widens with age. The older a man gets, the more likely he is to postpone, delay, or simply never go. A viewer once wrote in and said, "I ignored a symptom for 2 years because I told myself it was nothing. By the time I went in, nothing had a name and a stage." I've heard some version of that story more times than I can count. The shift that needs to happen isn't about becoming a hypochondriac. It's about treating your body the way you treat a car you actually care about. You don't wait for the engine to seize before you check the oil. You don't wait for the brakes to fail before you have them inspected. Your body after 60 is still strong, but it needs maintenance. And maintenance means paying attention before there's pain. Book the appointment. Get the blood work done. Stop treating the doctor's office like it's somewhere you only go when things are already wrong. Number 6, stop letting your friendships quietly disappear. I want to ask you something directly. How many men do you have in your life right now? Not acquaintances, not people you nod at in the neighborhood, but men you could call at 10 at night and actually talk to. Take a moment, count them. Most men over 60, if they're honest, count on one hand Many stop at 1, some count 0. It happens so gradually that most men don't even notice until the silence is deafening. You retire and the work relationships evaporate overnight. The kids grew up and the friendships built around school events and youth sports quietly dissolved. The guys you used to grab a beer with moved away or got sick or you just drifted and nobody told you to fight it. Because men, by and large, are never taught to fight for friendships the way they're taught to fight for everything else. Pete Calloway is 68 and lives in Richmond, Virginia. When his wife passed 3 years ago, Pete discovered something that frightened him more than the grief itself. He had no one to call. Not because he'd been unkind, not because he was difficult, simply because he had spent 40 years investing in his career, his marriage, his children, and had quietly let every male friendship he'd ever had shrink down to a Christmas card and a vague sense of goodwill. He told me, I had 100 people at her funeral, and I realized I couldn't name one of them I'd actually talked to in the last year. Here's what the research says about this, and it is not gentle. A major study tracking over 300,000 people across multiple countries found that social isolation carries a health risk comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It raises the risk of heart disease, it accelerates cognitive decline, and among men, specifically men, loneliness after retirement is one of the strongest predictors of early death that researchers have found. The reason it hits men harder is structural. Women, broadly, are more likely to maintain close friendships across decades. Men tend to rely on institutions, work, sports teams, shared activities, to do the social organizing for them. When those institutions disappear at retirement, so does the structure that held the friendships together. One commenter put it this way, I didn't realize how much of my social life was my wife's social life until she was gone. I had friends I borrowed from her for 30 years. If that lands somewhere familiar, that's the point. Stop waiting for friendships to maintain themselves. They won't. Call the guy you haven't called in 6 months. Show up to the thing you normally skip. Find one group, any group, men who fish or play chess or fix old radios. It genuinely does not matter. And stay with it long enough to matter to someone. Because the time to build those friendships is not when you need them. It is now, while you still can, while there's still something to build. Number 5, stop carrying problems in silence because asking for help feels like weakness. This one is so deeply woven into the identity of most men over 60 that even naming it can feel like an attack. I understand that. Stay with me. Most men who are 60 or older grew up in households where the message was clear, even when it was never spoken aloud. You figure it out yourself. You don't complain. You handle it. Asking for help was reserved for genuine emergency, the kind where you were bleeding or the roof had literally collapsed. That was a useful programming for a different time, for raising families, building careers, surviving hardship. It served a real purpose. But after 60, it starts working against you. Mick Houghton is 71 and lives in Knoxville, Tennessee. He spent 38 years as a structural engineer. Problems, by definition, were things you solved. That was his identity. That was his value. When he retired, the problems didn't stop. They just changed shape. Financial decisions he wasn't sure about. A grown son he felt distant from. A creeping heaviness he couldn't name that started most mornings and sat with him all day. He didn't mention any of it. Not to his wife, not to his doctor, not to his brother who lived 20 minutes away and had called every Sunday for years. I kept telling myself I'd figure it out, he told me. And every week I didn't. It got heavier. But asking for help felt like telling everyone I was falling apart. By the time his wife sat him down and said she was scared for him, he'd been carrying it alone for 14 months. 14 months. Here's the thing about silence and men and the years after 60. The silence doesn't protect anyone. It doesn't protect your family from worry. It just delays and concentrates it. It doesn't protect your sense of strength. It quietly hollows it out from the inside. And it does not solve the problem. It just ensures you face it alone, which is the worst possible condition for solving anything. A viewer once commented, I finally talked to my son about what I was going through. He said, Dad, I've been watching you disappear for a year, and I didn't know what to do. That hit me harder than anything. Asking for help at 67 is not the same thing as weakness. It's a different kind of strength, the kind that admits reality, the kind that lets other people who love you actually do something with that love instead of watching helplessly from the outside. Stop solving everything alone. You've earned the right to be supported. Number 4, stop living in the past version of yourself. This one is subtle. It hides in ordinary language. I used to run 5 miles every morning. Back when I was really active, when I was at the company, I was the one they called when I used to be the kind of man who pay attention to how many times in a given week you describe yourself in the past tense, because there's a difference between honoring where you've been and anchoring yourself so deeply to who you were that you stop becoming who you are. Jeff Swanson is 66 and lives in Portland, Oregon. For 30 years, he ran a construction firm, 40 employees at the peak. He was decisive, commanding, the kind of man rooms rearrange themselves around. He retired at 63, and within 18 months, by his own admission, he was a man other people talked around. Not because he'd lost his mind, not because his character had changed, because he had stopped being relevant in the present, and the only story he knew how to tell was the one that had already ended. His daughter finally said something. She said, "Dad, you keep talking about who you were like it's the most interesting thing about you, but I want to know who you are right now." He didn't have an answer. Psychologists who study men in retirement call this identity foreclosure, the state of clinging so tightly to a former role that there's no psychological room for a new one to develop. And it is, according to several studies, one of the leading psychological drivers of depression in men between 60 and 75. The man you were, the provider, the authority, the one with the corner office or the calloused hands or the team that depended on him, that man is part of you. He's not gone, but he's not all of you, not anymore. The men who age well are the ones who get curious about who they're becoming, not just proud of who they were. They take on things they're not yet good at. They let themselves be beginners. They find new ways to matter that have nothing to do with what they used to do. One commenter wrote, "I had to grieve the man I used to be before I could meet the man I'm becoming. That grieving took almost 2 years. It was the most important thing I ever did." Stop describing yourself in the past tense. The story isn't over. It just changed shape. Number 3, stop treating rest as something you have to earn. Men over 60, particularly men who spent decades in demanding careers or physical work, tend to carry a specific belief buried so deep it rarely gets examined. Rest is a reward. You earn it by being productive first. On the days when you are productive, rest feels deserved. On the days when you weren't, when you sat on the porch longer than planned, when you watched 2 hours of television in the afternoon, when you took a nap and woke up 2 hours later, a shadow follows you, a low-grade guilt, a sense that you're getting away with something you haven't earned. That belief, which served you well in a working life, is physiologically damaging in a post-60 body. Sam Kettridge is 70 and lives in Boise, Idaho. He worked physical labor his entire career, roofing primarily. Hard, honest work that required his body to perform at a high level for decades. When he retired at 65, the decades of stored physical debt came due all at once. His joints ached, his sleep was fragmented. He was exhausted in a way he'd never experienced during his working years. But every time he rested, the guilt came. "I'd fall asleep in the chair after lunch," he told me, "and wake up angry at myself. I kept thinking, what have I even done today that gives me the right to be this tired?" His doctor ran blood work. Cortisol levels were elevated. Chronically, not occasionally. His body had been running a low-grade stress response for months, fed partly by inadequate sleep and partly by the guilt that prevented him from sleeping deeply when the opportunity was there. The doctor told him something he struggled to accept. "Sam, your body is not underperforming. It is repairing, and you keep interrupting the repair by feeling bad about it." Here's the science underneath that. After 60, the body's recovery processes, then the cellular repair, the immune maintenance, the hormonal regulation that happens during deep rest, require more time and more intentional conditions than they did at 40. You're not getting lazier. Your biology is asking for more, not less. Guilt about resting is not a moral position. It is a habit. And like any habit, it can be unlearned. Rest is not what you get after you've earned it. After 60, rest is part of the work. It is the condition that allows everything else to function. Give yourself permission, not once, every day. Number 2, stop confusing being busy with being alive. This is the one that surprised me most when I found it in myself. After I retired, I filled every day, completely, meticulously, almost defensively. The calendar was always full. There was always somewhere to be, something to fix, an errand to run, a project half started in the garage. I was busy from morning until the moment I sat down at night, exhausted, and I was miserable. Not visibly, not in a way that alarmed anyone. I was fine, productive, busy, which for most men of my generation is the definition of fine. But underneath the motion, there was nothing. I was running the engine at full speed with no destination. Because the truth I'd been avoiding, the one the busyness was designed to drown out, was that I didn't know what I actually wanted from this chapter of my life. Busyness, for a lot of men over 60, is avoidance in disguise. It keeps you from sitting quietly long enough to feel the things you're not ready to feel, the losses you haven't fully processed, the relationship you know needs a real conversation, the question of what you're actually living for now that the structure has changed. Quentin Adler is 63 and lives in Raleigh, North Carolina. He retired from a 26-year career in financial services and had a full second life plan from day one. Consulting work, board positions, a new kitchen renovation, language lessons. He'd filled a spreadsheet. 18 months in, he sat across from his wife at dinner, and she said quietly, "Quentin, when was the last time you just sat with me for an hour with nowhere to be?" He couldn't remember. He told me, "I'd built a busier retirement than my working life. I thought that meant I was thriving, but I was doing exactly what I always did, using motion to avoid feeling like I might be standing still." This is one of the most honest things a man over 60 can do. Sit down in the quiet and ask himself, is all this motion carrying me towards something I actually want? Or is it just keeping me from noticing that I don't know the answer yet? The men who age well are not idle, but they're not frantically busy either. They have a pace that matches their actual life, not the life they used to have or the one they think they should be performing. Slow down long enough to know what you're living for. That's not laziness. That's the most important work of this entire stage of your life. And number one, the one I promised at the beginning, the one that took me the longest to admit. Stop waiting for retirement to be the life you've been putting off living. Let me explain what I mean. Most men who've worked for 30 or 40 years carry a version of the same internal promise. Someday, when I retire, when the kids are grown, when the mortgage is paid off, when I have time, then I'll do the things I actually want to do. Then I'll live the way I actually want to live. Then I'll become the person I've been saving myself to be. That promise keeps men going through decades of hard work. It's not a lie. It's a genuine belief. But here's what nobody tells you happens next. Retirement arrives. And instead of freedom, there's a blank. Instead of finally living, there's a question you've been postponing so long that you no longer know the answer. What do I actually want? Gareth Nolan is 69 and lives in Louisville, Kentucky. He worked in manufacturing management for 34 years. Solid career, good income. He told himself for the last decade of it that he was building towards something, a garden he'd plant, trips he'd take, books he'd finally read, a slower, truer version of life that was waiting for him on the other side of the last workday. He retired at 65, and then he waited for the life to begin. 2 years passed. I kept thinking it would start, he told me. I kept waiting to feel the freedom I'd been promised. But every morning I'd wake up and feel like I was between something, like the life I'd worked for hadn't actually shown up yet. It hadn't shown up because he hadn't built it. He'd built a career for 34 years, but he had no blueprint for what came after. He'd done the earning. He'd never done the imagining. A viewer once left a comment that I've thought about many times since. They wrote, "I spent 40 years building a life I could escape from. I never thought about building one I didn't need to escape." That is one of the most important sentences I've ever read. Men over 60, particularly men who've spent decades in performance and productivity, often discover that freedom without direction feels identical to emptiness, that the absence of obligation, which they dreamed of for years, turns out to be disorienting rather than liberating without something to fill it that genuinely matters. The life you've been putting off does not start automatically when the career ends. You have to build it deliberately with the same intention and energy you gave to everything else. Ask yourself honestly, what did I always say I'd do someday? And then ask the harder question, why am I still waiting to start? Not next month, not when you feel more settled, more rested, more ready. The men who live the best final chapters of their lives are not the ones who had the best first chapters. They are the ones who looked at the blank page in front of them and decided it was not a problem to manage. It was an invitation. Write something on it this week, today, because someday has a way of arriving as never. Let me bring all 7 together. Number 7, stop waiting until something hurts to pay attention to your body. Maintenance happens before the breakdown, not after. Number 6, stop letting your friendships quietly disappear. They don't maintain themselves. Fight for them the same way you fought for everything else. Number 5, stop carrying problems in silence because asking for help feels like weakness. Silence doesn't protect anyone. It just ensures you suffer alone. Number 4, stop living in the past version of yourself. Honoring who you were and becoming who you are now are not the same thing. Number 3, stop treating rest as something you have to earn. After 60, rest is not the reward. It is part of the work. Number 2, stop confusing being busy with being alive. Motion is not meaning. Slow down long enough to know the difference. And number 1, stop waiting for retirement to be the life you've been putting off. That life does not start itself. Now, if you recognize yourself in more than a few of these, I want to say something clearly. That is not a reason for shame. Every single one of these patterns made complete sense at an earlier stage of your life. They were built from real experience, real pressures, real values. You did not fail to manage them. No one handed you a guide for what happens after the structure falls away. The only error would be to see them clearly and change nothing. You're watching this. You're paying attention. That already puts you ahead. If this reached something real in you, please share it with a man you know who might need to hear it. A brother, a friend, a father. Sometimes the most useful thing one man can do for another is say, I found this and I thought of you. Hit the like button, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next, and leave me a comment. I read everyone. Tell me, which of these 7 hit closest to home for you? And what's one thing you've already stopped doing or decided right now to stop? Your answer may be exactly what the next man who finds this video needs to read. Thank you for watching, and remember, the years after 60 are not a postscript. They are the part you actually get to write yourself.